Episode 21 of the Virginia for USA podcast. We welcome back our friend, Mr. Gary Porter.
This is Virginia for USA, a podcast dedicated to giving a voice to concerned citizens of the Commonwealth of Virginia and the United States of America. Engaging friends and neighbors, we are learning about the issues of our local and national community. Welcome, and let the conversation begin.
Hello, everyone. In this episode, Joe Legaspi speaks with Gary Porter, a podcast regular. Gary is a retired U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, currently writing and teaching on America's First Principles. He introduces us to the phenomenon of progressivism, what it is, how this concept originated, and what it means in today's political environment. There's so much more to talk about, so let's get started.
All right. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Virginia for USA, the Virginia for USA podcast. Today, we are speaking with Mr. Gary Porter. He's a return guest. He was our expert on the Constitution, and today he's going to be talking on a little bit of a different topic, something of interest to all of us who are following the national elections and local elections, congressional elections. They're tossing a word around quite a bit. The word is progressivism or progressive. And it's kind of difficult to understand, especially if you're used to hearing things like conservative and liberal, Democrat, Republican. This progressive thing, where does it come from? What does it mean? What does it pretend? Who are the progressives in our society? Where do they come from? And what are their beginnings? So that's what we're going to be talking today. So I welcome you, Gary, to help us out in understanding this idea.
Thanks, Joe. It's great to be here again.
Great.
Well, let's start with something that Hillary Clinton said recently. She said, "I'm a progressive who gets results, and I will be a progressive president who gets results." And when she said that, Bernie Sanders comes back and says, "I don't know any progressive who has a super PAC and takes $15 million from Wall Street." So right there, you've got two liberals who are arguing over who is the real progressive and what progressivism really is, because Bernie Sanders says that, at least alludes to the fact that Hillary Clinton's got it wrong, that she doesn't understand progressivism if she's calling herself one and still takes money from Wall Street. So what is progressivism? Well, there's no dictionary definition of it that really everyone would agree to. So it's a very loose, amorphous term that allows you to define it in a number of different ways, really however you want to define it. But if you run into a progressive, they are sure that they are progressive. I mean, once they've got that as their philosophy of life, then they are sure that they're a progressive. They may not be sure about these other progressives, but they're sure that they're one.
Yes.
Okay. What is progressivism? Well, I found a video on Hillsdale College's website. They have some great videos, by the way, great courses, and they have taken on progressivism as well. And they have several videos that deal with this. And so one of their professors has taken the time to try to define progressivism as best he can. And there's about 5 different tenets that define a progressive. But number one, the one that probably all of them will agree to, is that it's a belief in statism. Now, what is statism? Statism, bluntly, is a belief that the state has all the answers, the government has all the answers to any problem that we encounter in this society. And in fact, government is probably the first resort to solving any problems, because government has all these resources, it has all these people, it has all this expertise, it has all this science behind it.
And good intentions, of course.
And great intentions, of course. It wants to solve problems for its people. So first of all, it's a belief in statism, the belief that the government is going to solve our problems rather than the private sector, rather than letting society work as a society and solve these problems by themselves, they turn to government for a solution. Say, here, fix this. We've got poor people in America. Fix this. We've got people who are kids who are going to school hungry. Fix this. We've got unemployment, that's still too high. Fix this.
Or we have greedy companies and corporations.
We've got all these companies making these billions and billions of dollars, and yet we've got people scraping by. Fix this.
Who can help us? Yes.
Fix this. So, number one, it's a belief that government is going to be the solution to anything. And the solution may not be clear as to how government is going to solve this, but it's just an innate belief that government will, in fact, find a way to solve everything that we ask it to do. Well, so that's the first tenet. The second tenet is a little harder to describe because it comes out of a philosophy that originates from George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. Hegel, mid-1800s in Germany. Hegel comes up with this theory called historicism.
Yes.
Historicism is a belief that all of the lessons of history apply only to the time in which those lessons were first identified. And the way this comes together is that, say, the Declaration of Independence, okay? In the Declaration of Independence, Thomas Jefferson says, we hold these truths to be self-evident. Well, a progressive will say, yes, those were truths, but those were 1776 truths.
At that time.
And they only apply in 1776. So the fact that all men are created equal and are ordained by the Creator with certain inalienable rights is not a transcendent, permanent truth. It is something that applies in 1776.
It's contextual, really.
So it doesn't apply today necessarily. You have to put it in its historical context, and that is what historicism basically says. So there's no immutable truth, or there's no transcendent truth anywhere in the universe. Everything is in a context of history at the time in which that truth was identified.
Would you say it's relative?
Everything is relative. There is no transcendent truth. Everything is relative. And so that's the second earmark of a progressive, is that everything has to be taken in context. You can't necessarily apply lessons from 1776, lessons from 1787 to today. Maybe they'll apply, but maybe they won't, because those were just truths in that period of time.
Now, was Hegel a religious person, or was he an atheist, or how do you deny certain immutable truths?
Well, he wasn't a Christian. He wasn't a theist. Okay. He certainly wasn't someone who believes in anything transcendent in terms of a transcendent God or transcendent truth in the way we would think of that term today. So Hegel was sitting there in Germany in the mid-1800s coming up with these philosophies. And guess who we're sending to Germany to get their masters and doctorates? All the college professors of America.
Yes.
Everybody's flocking to Germany to learn these new philosophies.
And they're impressed.
So they're greatly impressed. And so they bring back to American universities all this stuff from Hegel and Rousseau, a Frenchman. Rousseau is another big demagogue of the progressives. And he takes Locke's view of social contract, which which the founders are very familiar with, and Rousseau takes it and turns it into basically a Hobbesian view of the state, that the state is all powerful, that people come together in a society and they give all of their power over to the state. The state becomes then the complete sovereign. Everybody must bend to the desires of the state. Or the common good, if you will. So whatever's good for the common people, whether it jumps on your inherent inalienable rights or not, if it's for the common good, you have to accede to that. And so Rousseau takes Locke's view. Locke's view would be we all give to government our sovereign powers temporarily.
Right. As long as they're worthy of it.
And use it properly.
And use it properly.
And use properly. That's exactly what the Virginia Convention in 1788 said, is they were ratifying the convention. All these powers are inherent in the people, and they're being given to the government as long as they're used properly. If they're used for their injury or oppression, we're taking them back.
Yes.
That's Locke. And you can take them back under Locke's view of social contract, because you're only temporarily giving up these powers to sovereignty, to a sovereign government. Under Rousseau's view, you give them up. It's a one-way trip. That's right. You don't get them back.
And that's Hobbes's view as well.
And that's Hobbes's view as well. Yeah. The state becomes all powerful, and it's working for our benefit. It's trying to protect us from this life that is brutish and short and
nasty,
rough,
solitary, brutish and short. Yeah.
We went through this in the natural law group. That's Hobbes's view of government as well. This Leviathan, it is working for our benefit, but it has all the power.
Yes.
And you don't have any power whatsoever. You have given up all your sovereign power to government so it can do what it needs to do.
And you don't have the right to revolt against it or to rebel against it.
And neither do you have that right under Rousseau's view of social contract. Once you give up these powers and become part of society, boom, one-way street. So Rousseau takes Locke's view and turns it upside down, and that's very counter then to what the founders believed. The founders believed in Locke's view of government and power and sovereignty. So Rousseau...
But individual sovereignty.
Individual sovereignty, exactly. So Rousseau and Hegel are the two philosophical sources for progressivism, and they both bring something to the table as far as a progressive is concerned. The state is all powerful. The state is benevolent, but nevertheless all powerful.
Omnipotent, yeah.
Okay, so whatever is for the common good as defined by the state, we have to bend over and try to enjoy it. So the third belief then of progressivism is the belief in a living constitution, and it kind of bleeds out of this historicism idea. The Constitution has to be looked at as a living document in the eyes of the progressives, so that it can be continually updated and made more progressive, more relevant to its times. So you've got to allow the court to continuously reinterpret the Constitution to show us what it means today as opposed to what it meant in 1787. This living Constitution was first termed, the term itself was first termed by Woodrow Wilson, our 28th president, I think. And when he came into power in 1912, he came in with a very, very clear view of the changes he wanted to make in government, because he had studied Hegel, he had studied Rousseau, he had studied all these philosophers, and he knew in his mind that there was a science to governing, that all you had to be was skilled in the science of administration of government, and you could do all these things, and it would work out. It's all going to work out because you're the expert in how to govern people. So just give us the power. We, the progressive, give us the power. We'll make everything work out for you. And that's Wilson's view. Do
you think he took some of the example from Teddy Roosevelt? And the idea of a strong...
Well, he certainly took the example of Teddy Roosevelt. Now, Teddy Roosevelt's a great example as well. Teddy Roosevelt would have been a progressive even if there wasn't progressivism. I mean,
because it was him.
He was
the man.
He brought the intellectual, that was not really what I want to say. He brought the personality of progressivism to life. It was his personality, his vibrant, effervescent, always on the go
charisma.
I say in my essay, he's the first example I've found of a perpetual motion machine. He always had to be doing something. And he would have been a progressive. He'd been labeled a progressive even if there had been no progressivism invented. Because that was just the mindset he brought to the job of president. His view was The people of the United States voted me into office. I am their representative, and I'm going to do whatever is necessary unless it's specifically prohibited to me in the Constitution. So, and rather than
that didn't stop him.
Well, no, it didn't. So rather than a constitution of limited and enumerated powers, which is how the founders looked at it, Roosevelt sees the Constitution as endless, except for these very few things that he's prohibited from doing. And I don't know how he identifies those, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says the president shall not.
Right.
You know, there's nothing.
He can do anything. Yeah.
So for him to say anything except what I'm prevented from doing is kind of illogical, because there's nothing in the Constitution that says the president cannot or shall not do this or that or the other thing. So, but Roosevelt brought this view to the presidency then. Anything's fair game. Whatever I do is obviously done in the interest of the people who voted me into office. And so Congress be damned, Constitution be damned. I'm going to do what I think is right. And if I get away with it, fine. If they impeach me, fine. But I'm going to do what I think is right. So I don't think Roosevelt saw himself as a progressive.
Right.
Even though by that time there was a progressive party and he was their nominee.
He was a part of that. Right?
I don't think he saw himself as a progressive from an intellectual level. He was just somebody who had a clear view of his own capabilities, and he was going to get the job done.
In other words, if a progressive were in power and he was not, and they were, opposed to his ideas, policy-wise, he would not consider the state to be.
No.
He would not have surrendered his will to a state that did not agree with his personality.
He would still be the one with the right idea.
He would fight. He would continue to fight.
He would be the one with the right idea. So.
So we come to Wilson, who believes the state.
Wilson has spent,
regardless of his own personality,
he has spent his whole adult life as an intellect, as an academic. He gets his doctorate at Johns Hopkins. Johns Hopkins University was the first university founded in this country with no ecclesiastical roots.
Interesting.
All the other major universities had some sort of church foundation.
Affiliation.
Johns Hopkins was the first one to break with that mold, and it really is the hotbed of progressivism in the United States. All the professors of Johns Hopkins studied in Germany under either Hegel himself or other professors who had studied under Hegel, and they all brought back progressivism. That was the center of gravity of progressivism.
So the state becomes the authority.
So if you went to Johns Hopkins, that's what you came out of there with, and that's where Wilson took his master's and a doctorate degree, and then he went on to teach for most of his adult life, and basically regurgitating all that he had learned at Johns Hopkins. And
at Princeton, you said?
Princeton. Well, he ends up being selected as the president of Princeton.
I see.
And he's the president of Princeton when he then runs for his first elective office as the governor of New Jersey. And he's not even finished with his first term as governor of New Jersey when he runs for president. So basically he's an academic, and he brings that whole academic view of progressivism into the presidency. I'm going to fix this. I know exactly what a progressive government needs, and just give me the power and I'll do it. I'll completely restructure government so it can fix all of our problems. That's Wilson's view. And of course he had a great example in Roosevelt, because Roosevelt expanded the powers of the presidency so that Wilson could take advantage of those expanded powers.
You open the gate.
Yes.
And they're all
Roosevelt pushes aside the boundaries.
Yeah.
Wilson says, "Thank you very much. Now I'll take that expanded power and I'll do with it what I think is right in terms of turning this country into a well-run country. Well-run.
Yes, well-run.
We have the science, we've got the experts, we can run it. We can run the whole economy, we can solve all the social problems. We are the experts. So those are two views, and I said we started on this tangent with Wilson inventing the term living constitution.
Yes.
And so the Constitution has to bend. It has to bend with the times. It has to be reinterpreted with each new generation. It can't be self-evident, based on self-evident truths like the Declaration portends it to be. It has to bend. And progressives then, can't live with this static document. They feel bound by it. They feel constrained by it. They can't live in this tight little shell of a constitution that means the same today as it did in 1787.
Well, I think from the judiciary, many jurists might consider it their job to reinterpret it. They kind of gives them the carte blanche to be activist in it. They think it's their responsibility to reinterpret it in context of the times.
Well, Roosevelt faced this problem of the Supreme Court that wanted to keep the Constitution under this founder's view. And so one of his first, maybe even his first nomination to the Supreme Court is Oliver Wendell Holmes. Right. Oliver Wendell Holmes is a tried and true progressive. He is a progressive through and through. And so Roosevelt puts him on the court, and then he's on the court for 30 or 40 years. And he and Brandeis, the second progressive, are just making all of these progressive rulings and bringing that viewpoint into the Supreme Court. They're outvoted a lot of the time, but they're there, and they're pushing they're present. They're pushing. They're definitely pushing to the extent they can. Well, as we talked about in this morning's radio show, this all comes to a head in 1937. We've now got FDR as the president, a true progressive. He knows that government can do big things, and
we're in the midst of a depression.
Been in the midst of the depression, and Hoover's been unable to find any solution to it. So I've got to solve this, but I know that government can do it. And so we've got all this brain trust, as he calls it. I'm going to bring all these brains together, and we're going to solve these problems with the power of government. But you've still got a Supreme Court that is basically conservative and saying, no, that's not going to pass constitutional muster. That's not going to. So it's shooting down all of FDR's initiatives until 1937, February 5th of 1937. The day before, the court had announced 3 more decisions. They all had gone against the administration, and he says, enough's enough. I got to fix this. So he proposes what's called the Judicial Reform Act of 1937, and it says, the justices are getting too old, and they just can't keep up with all the caseload, all these appeals that come to them, and they can't take but a few of them. And they're just, if we could get some more younger blood in there, we could get more things done. We could get more cases solved. We could get more progress progressing. It's all about progress progressing. Right. So FDR says, I propose to the Congress, because that's all the president can do. And the Constitution gives him that latitude. He can propose legislation at any time. It's one of his responsibilities, as a matter of fact. So he proposes that we add at least 6 new justices to the Supreme Court, replacing every justice who gets to 70 and a half and refuses to retire. Wow. If he wants to stay on as a justice at 70 and a half, we're going to add another younger justice to help him with this caseload. Well, guess who these younger justices are going to be? They're going to all be progressives.
Of course.
Yeah, so he definitely wants to tip the balance. And now, to their credit, Congress sees through this immediately. Right. I mean, how blatant can you be? And so Congress takes this Judicial Reform Act and pushes it off on their judiciary committees, and it just dies. The Senate actually holds some hearings, and the administration tries to defend this idea, and it just doesn't go anywhere. So it's not going to happen, and the Congress is going to make sure it doesn't happen. It's a democratically controlled Congress at this time that FDR has to deal with. So But here's what happens. Just a month, 7 weeks later,
Mhm.
this was suggested on February 5th, 1937. 7 weweeks later, all of a sudden, the court announces a whole slew of decisions.
Huh.
And they're all in favor of the administration.
Oh, boy. So there's some
So they went,
hanky-panky.
oh, well,
obviously.
they went, in fact, 2 of the decisions are unanimously in favor of the administration's position.
Huh.
2 of the 3 that they announced.
Well, they got the message, in other words.
They got the message. The message was delivered loud and clear.
Yes.
Now, today, our Chief Justice, John Roberts.
Right.
Back then, there was a Associate Justice, Owen Roberts. Owen Roberts is the justice who switches his view of what used to be constitutional to what now is constitutional. He is given the title, "The Switch in Time That Saved 9." And it's really a bogus, it's a bogus slogan, because although he did switch his view and his votes,
Yes.
Owen Roberts was the swing vote that
Yes.
suddenly started seeing things the way the administration wanted him to.
Huh.
But it wasn't he that saved the 9 on the court. It
Right.
was Congress.
It was Congress.
Congress who took the Judicial Reform Act and pushed it back in the committees.
Mm.
They saved the 9.
Right.
It wasn't Owen Roberts' switch.
Yeah, but they certainly got the message.
But the court got the message. And from that point on, National Industrial Recovery Act, the Social Security Act, all these things
All these progressive,
are suddenly
yeah.
constitutional.
Oh, gosh.
Well within the power
Uh-huh.
of the government to do that. So FDR, gets credit for breaking the log jam on
Mhm.
this living constitution
Right,
thing
right.
and finally getting the court to see it that way. Wilson was the one that wanted the court to see it as a living document.
Uh-huh.
FDR is the one that finally convinced
Mm.
them to view it as a living document and suddenly reinterpret all these things differently.
And why would the justices oppose that? That gives them more power, more influence.
Absolutely.
Why would they reject that?
We need to ask Owen Roberts. I mean, he's the one really that became key to this switch.
Right.
He's the only one really that started seeing things differently, and that one vote was enough to turn 4-5 into 5-4.
Wow. Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't.
We don't know what was said behind closed doors. We don't know what deals were made.
We don't, and I don't think Justice Owen Roberts ever wrote a memoir that explained what was going through his mind during this time. I would have loved to have been a fly on the wall.
Sure.
During those
what was the flash of insight? Did he get a visit from Thomas Jefferson
So Wilson's idea of a living constitution finally comes to fruition 20 years later, but it finally comes to fruition, and from that point on, the court just interprets the Constitution any way the government wants it to.
Right, and thus we see the growth of the Constitution.
All these limited and enumerated powers are now general and unlimited powers. That's progressivism.
Insidious.
I mean, progressivism, you got to give them credit for being really dedicated and determined to getting their way.
Oh, yeah.
They're going to knock on that door until they beat it down.
That's one thing I think even now in current politics, there's a recognition from the right that the left is well disciplined and well organized.
Yep.
And Bernie Sanders, he fell in line pretty quick, didn't he?
He did. They are focused. You really have to give them credit for
disciplined.
They are determined. They're determined to make this America look like they want it to.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I guess they feel comfortable falling in line, and that's the problem with us conservatives is we don't. We're for freedom. We want everyone to have their individual liberties, and that's the difference. This is another key difference.
So there's some great books out there that I can turn people on to.
For sure.
If you want to learn about progressivism, there's several books. One called Plundered, How Progressive Ideologies Destroyed America by Michael Kaufman.
Yes.
Another one called Progressivism, a Primer on the Idea Destroying America by James Ostrowski. Those are great ones if you just want to learn more about what progressivism is. Now, on our radio show, we've covered now 2 weeks 4 presidents those are not all the progressive presidents we've had.
Sure.
Okay, and here's
yeah, I was going to ask you. So these are mostly Democrat, left liberals. What about progressives on
Teddy Roosevelt was a Republican first, and then a progressive
yes.
/ Bull Moose Party.
Yes.
But the point is, you don't have to be on the left to be a progressive.
Great point.
Anybody can subscribe to these tenets of statism, historicism, living constitution, and we have had many progressive Republican presidents.
I mean, the nature of executive orders, right?
Yep.
Or that speaks to that.
George Bush was a progressive Republican president.
Yes.
Who else? Eisenhower was a progressive Republican president. Lincoln was a progressive Republican president. So you don't have to be on the left of the political spectrum to be a progressive. All you have to do is sign up to their tenets. And you can be on any part of the political spectrum. All you have to believe is that government has the answer. That's really the essence of it. Does government have the answer to solve this problem, or should we let society and the private sector solve this problem?
President Obama, for instance, we know he's never, I don't know that he has come out on public and stated clearly that he was a progressive, yet his policies and his behavior in office suggest that he is. Who are some other, classic progressives that we need to be aware of in our government, whether it's in the bureaucracy or in the Congress, that we should at least recognize?
We don't want to overlook Hillary Clinton.
Yes.
Okay. I mean, she is a progressive. She says she's a progressive. Yes. I'm taking her at her word.
Yes, she does.
And I know what her policies are. They've been very clear. If she's allowed to become the president, she is going to complete all the things that Obama was unsuccessful in doing. And particularly if, God forbid, the Congress swings to Democratic control in this next election. If we have Hillary Clinton and a Democratic Congress,
it's over.
It's over. There is no more freedom in America.
All right.
We as Reagan said, we're going to be, if that occurs, we will be sitting on our front porches telling our grandkids what it was like in America when men were free.
When men were free.
That will come to pass.
Well, we talked earlier about the idea here that, about, certainly it's clear Hillary Clinton is a self-proclaimed progressive. But I got to say, in analyzing the presidential election, we look at Donald Trump, and I would have to say, and I asked you this earlier, what are the indications that you would have or that we could see that he won't be a progressive in that way, that he respects the Constitution as it was framed out by the founders, that he respects the powers of the president that are explained in the Constitution?
I think it's going to come down to the advisors and the cabinet members that Trump chooses. Let's just say, for purposes of argumentation, that Trump becomes president. It really will depend on who he selects as his key advisors and his cabinet members. If they bring into those offices, those positions, a founder's view, a conservative view, then we can sit back and probably rest assured that it's going to be a reasonably conservative presidency. But if he selects the wrong people, he has the personality that if he's advised improperly, he will go ahead and try the progressive view.
Why not?
He will try to make government solve these problems. And that's what it'll come down to. So he has the personality that he can go either way. I think he's smart enough that he will put the right people in positions. I think he will do that. I certainly am confident that he will do that. But I can't predict that.
Yeah, you can't.
I can't predict that
until
he's given a chance.
That's fair to say. We don't know, but we should remain vigilant nonetheless.
Right, and if he becomes a president, then we need to pay very close attention to those advisors, to those cabinet members, and his Supreme Court nominations, because those will show us where he intends to go with his presidency. And if he starts putting a bunch of progressives into those positions, just because they're Republican doesn't mean they're not progressive.
Right.
If he puts progressives into those positions, then we need to get very involved with our congressmen.
Yes.
And we need to make sure that Congress is going to hold the line on these things.
you made some great points earlier in history about guys who faced down FDR, in defense of the Constitution. I mean, what are the books or articles about those guys, biographies about those guys who had to face incredible pressure against a president who was popular, who was leading a war on two fronts, and yet these guys stood up to him. How is that possible? Do you know?
I don't know who stood up to FDR.
Yeah,
I haven't found.
That's a book you're going to write. Gary,
I haven't found anybody yet.
To me, that's remarkable.
I mean, look, he got elected 4 times.
Yes.
Who stood up to him?
Who could have?
The American people weren't going to stand up. They elected him 4 times.
Right. That's right.
So who was there to stand up?
Who would hold a guy like that?
Well, I'll tell you, there's a book on my shelf that I need to read. It's called Lindbergh and FDR.
Mm.
Lindbergh stood up to FDR,
Okay.
and particularly the war hawkish FDR.
Yes.
FDR took us into World War II.
Sure.
He egged on the Japanese
Yeah.
until they did exactly what he wanted them to do.
Mm-hmm.
He basically begged them to attack us.
Yeah. Right.
And he made sure that the entire Pacific Fleet was sitting there that day in Pearl Harbor, ready to get schwacked.
Yes, and that's what happened.
Now,
incredible.
And Lindbergh saw this coming, and like I said, I haven't read this book yet, but I know where it's going. Lindbergh was one of those guys who stood up to FDR, and he took a lot of heat for it because look how popular this guy was.
Right.
His fireside chants.
Yes.
He's sitting there in your living room talking to you, fellow Americans.
That's right.
Come on, let's get these problems solved.
That's the thing is that it's with media. You're able to reach out across, and now we have a globalized media. People can talk to you. You're looking at faces. People are communicating to you and on Facebook or anything, and they seem very human and very sympathetic. Certainly, you want to believe them. You want to believe if somebody promises to solve your problems. You want to do that, especially people who are maybe a little bit weak, a little bit lazy, a little bit uninformed. They're going to fall prey.
And see, that's the tragic thing, because progressives are not bad people.
Mm-hmm.
They want to solve problems. They want to make things better. They just don't have the right view of how to go about that.
Right.
They see only the state as the solution. Well, the state can't do anything unless you give them the tax money to do it with.
That's right.
So if you want the state to solve your problems, well, then open up your wallet, because that's exactly what it's going to take. The state can solve a lot of things if they have the money to do it. Right now, it doesn't. I mean, we're $20 trillion in debt. Clearly, the American people have not been willing to fund the government at the rate in which the government is spending money. We're $20 trillion in debt.
But I don't want anybody to think that we're going to solve problems by putting more money to it. We're not. In fact, we're making it worse. The government
government can't do anything without money.
Yeah, I know, but they're taking the money. They're doing the wrong things. They're wasting money on terrible projects. And
you heard David Whitney's example, his metaphor this morning.
Yeah.
For government to solve a problem means that government takes a bucket down to one end of the pool.
Yes.
It takes some water out of the pool,
Right.
and it runs down to the other end of the pool. Of course, it's spilling a little bit of the water.
Yes, along the way.
That's the overhead that government tries to charge to do anything, and it's putting that water in the other end of the pool. That's how government solves problems.
And that's horrible.
People don't understand that.
That's right.
Every penny that government has has come from you and me.
You're right.
Now, why can't I spend that penny?
I've heard people who are working in even local governments, county or township governments, and they said, look, we can't make our budget. If people need to just give just another $12 a month or $15, $20 a month in tax increase, and we can make the budget. Why can't people just do that? And I said, no, of course not.
Why can't you trim down the budget?
Thank you. That's the wrong question, and that's giving money is the wrong answer. What we need to be doing is guarding every penny jealously. Because for lack of that is why we're in this kind of debt problem now.
Exactly.
And we're headed for a financial collapse.
It is coming. And
it is.
And here's the sad part. If Donald Trump is elected president and goes the progressive route, that the state, the government is the solution to these problems, then that collapse is going to happen on his watch.
Exactly.
It's not going to be longer than 4 years.
We've got to have
And
policies,
unfortunately,
yeah.
then he's gonna be blamed as the bad boy.
Yeah, yeah, but he inherited the problem.
It all collapsed on his watch.
Right.
Republicans
That's
were the
right.
were the,
That's
the
right.
bad boys.
Yeah.
They're the culprits, so they let it happen. So
It's tough.
I'm not looking forward to whoever the next president is.
That's right. I think no matter what I think all of us have to look beyond the election, and no matter who wins, because we have minimal or no control over we have our vote. That's it.
Yeah.
But beyond that, we can't just fall off the face of the earth and on November 9th or whatever it is. We have to think about what we're going to do next.
Right.
Exactly. And whether that's
people have to get
active,
engaged.
yes,
they have to get involved
intellectually, right, with this kind of material here.
The days of voting for somebody, sending them to Washington, and then going back to watching Dancing with the Stars are over. Those days are gone.
Enough.
Kiss them goodbye.
That's right.
No, if you want to say that those days are still here, that we can still do that.
Yeah. No. It's not getting better.
It's going to all come.
It's interesting. If you take us back to 1912 and those days when maybe government, it was smaller, obviously, than it is now. Mm-hmm. And maybe let's give them the benefit of the doubt that they had very intellectual, smart guys running things. They were efficient, they were well-intended, and they were trying hard.
Yeah. But
that government isn't this government. This government is huge. It's lugubrious. It's clumsy. It's a big ape and elephant in the room that's knocking things down, and they don't know what they're doing. They don't do it right. They don't do it well. We have lazy, indolent people in the government, and I was one of them, so I know.
This has been the Virginia for USA podcast. Thanks for listening.